Welcome back. 5 years ago, nurse Colin Norris was called a cold-blooded serial killer and jailed for 30 years for the murder of 4 elderly women in his care and the attempted murder of another.
But new evidence published today suggests that he could well be innocent. We're going to be talking to Colin's mother, June, in just a moment. But first, let's talk to Jonathan Swain at Leeds General Infirmary. Jonathan, can you remind us again of what exactly happened?
Morning, Lorraine. Well, this is the hospital where Colin Norris should have cared for his patients. Instead, it's the place where he was accused of killing them. Now, he's convicted of killing these 4 elderly patients by injecting them with lethal doses of the hormone insulin. Now, insulin is something you would normally administer to patients who are diabetic, but in this particular case, none of the women patients were. Well, now, new evidence suggests that they may well have died of natural causes, which is a very different story from what we heard during his trial.
Well, I'm not going to admit to anything that I've not done, and I never murdered anybody, didn't inject anybody with anything.
When Colin Norris was convicted and sentenced to life in 2008, he was labelled an evil serial killer in the mould of Harold Shipman and called the Angel of Death.
The nurse who murdered 4 elderly patients could have gone on to kill many more.
Police were convinced they stopped a murderer in his tracks.
Then I think a serial killer would still be at large here.
Norris was found guilty of murdering 4 elderly ladies and attempting to murder another by injecting them with a lethal dose of insulin. His attitude in interviews was considered arrogant.
If somebody came and injected me with a syringe that size, I would have something to say about it.
The judge sentencing Norris said he was evil and dangerous and claimed his crimes were driven by a hatred of old people.
Well, Colin's mother, June Morrison, and Inside Justice campaigner Louise Shorter join us now. And June, you've always been convinced of his innocence. So you're his mother. You would expect that. But this new evidence gives you hope that perhaps everyone else will feel the same as you.
Yes, hopefully. You know, it's so strong, the new evidence, and hopefully people will, you know, take a good look at it, and hopefully we can get Colin back to the Court of Appeal.
Now, does he know about this? Presumably he's well aware of this. And what's his reaction been to it?
Well, he's just thankful for someone listening to him, you know, for the support that he's been getting from ourselves and people like Louise with Inside Justice. And he's always got the wee doubt at the back of his mind, but because it's taken so long to get to this point, and we've already lost an appeal, so but we're hopeful. There is a bit of hope there this time.
Louise, how significant is this new evidence then?
It's very strong. At the time of the trial, that the view by all the experts there was that it was to find a group of patients who were not diabetics, who had suffered with hypoglycemia. To find them in one place, in one hospital at one period of time was so unusual. That must mean murder. And what the new evidence shows us is that actually that was completely wrong. Now medics know that up to 10% of elderly patients who are non-diabetics can suffer from hypoglycemia. So if you're looking for them, to find 5 cases together really isn't that strange.
But this new evidence isn't that new, is it? You know, the autoimmune condition as a possible cause of death was all aired in court. It was rejected by the jury.
That was a different thing. That's a different element to it. One of the difficulties with this case, I think, is that the science was so complex. Right. I mean, the trial went on for 5 months. It took the judge a week to sum up. It was an incredibly complicated area.
Let's take the case of Ethel Hall. One of the victims had 1,000 milligrams of pharmaceutically manufactured insulin in her body. They even recognised which it was.
Yes.
How can that be explained?
Well, the difficulty with the case was that Ethel Hall became hypoglycemic. The medics then took one blood test, and from that test, they decided that she had this catastrophically high level of insulin in her system. There were all sorts of things they should have done at that stage. They should have automatically confirmed that. If you have a blood test that's telling you foul play has happened, then you would think the automatic and obvious thing to do would be to go and retest it. That didn't happen. They should have taken a blood sample from the patient when she was actually hypoglycemic and tested that. That didn't happen. The blood sample was taken when she came out of the hypoglycemia. They should have done a better type of test. They did an immunoassay, which is a diagnostic test, and they really should have gone on to do a much better test to really challenge, to make sure the result was correct.
There's enough evidence now for an appeal. Do you think that's
Absolutely.
likely to happen?
Absolutely.
You're convinced about
the
that?
entire landscape of the trial has changed. At the time, as I say, it was thought very much that to find this cluster was so unusual, and that's known not to be true now.
And June, obviously, you know, you'd hoped hopes are raised. Of course they are. I just wonder what it's been like for him in jail. You know, what sort of life it's been for him there.
Well, as a young lad, I mean, we've never been in trouble with the police. We've never had any dealings of that sort. So to throw someone from that kind of spot into a Category A prison, it's been very difficult for him. He's had to change his way of thinking. He's had to change his every day. I mean, he's always looking over his shoulder still,
Yes.
but that's part of the regime. That's what he's got to do. He's got to deal with what happens every day in prison, and I'm out here trying to deal with making more people aware.
I can understand completely how hard it is for you, but obviously, you know, our thoughts are with the families of those who died, because they need to know,
of course,
as well. You know, everybody needs that. That's the thing. We need to get to the truth here. We need to find out what has happened.
Yes, yes.
4 of the 5 families from the time of when they first died were told, of course, that they died of natural causes. They buried their loved one, believing that they died as elderly people from all sorts of different natural conditions. And then months later, the police went back to them and said, well, actually, you know, we think that maybe there was foul play.
Yes,
it's been an absolutely terrible ordeal for them. We found families during our investigation who had been told by the police that they also thought that Colin had possibly murdered those people. And then when they found he wasn't on duty, they showed the families the work rotors to say he could not have killed the family, your loved one. He is now no longer considered a suspect. It was a conclusion-driven investigation.
Listen, thank you both for coming in and talking to us today. We really appreciate it, and obviously we'll keep an eye on developments as they happen. Thank you very much indeed. Right, coming up this morning, after